Welcome back to Until Saturday, the Athletics College Football Podcast feed. My name is Chris Vanini. We are here to talk about best case and worst case scenarios for the Big Ten, the Big 12, the ACC. If you want to know about the other conferences, those are earlier in your feed. I'm joined here in a moment by Audrey Snyder, our Penn State beat writer, and Pete Sampson, our longtime Notre Dame beat writer. Before we get into the podcast, wanted to let you know next week we will be getting back to our normal schedule of programming. We will have Stars Matter. We will have Power Hour. We will have Max and Sam. We will have the normal Thursday preview, the Saturday recap show. So get ready for a normal schedule coming out of this week. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get podcasts, and the YouTube channel if you're watching it there as well. Everything will be regularly updated. And also, by the way, we will have a mini series running beginning this Wednesday, 4-part series about the Bishop Sycamore saga. If you remember that from last year, it's going to coincide with the HBO documentary series BS High, which is based on the Athletics reporting. So keep an eye out for that in the feed as well. Audrey, Pete, good to have you guys. It's week 0. Football's finally here. How are you guys doing?
I'm good. You've got balloons behind you, Chris. So is it your birthday?
It was my birthday a week ago, and my wife's birthday a few days later. Those are from her office. We have a bunch of dogs in this house, so we threw the balloons into my office to keep them away because they like to bark at them. So if you're watching this on the YouTube channel, there's I think it's Paw Patrol is one of the balloons behind me.
Oh, Chase is on the case. I like it.
Week 0 balloons or something. So I thought you were celebrating early.
Yeah, really. Like I should have balloons because I get to fly to Dublin on Wednesday night. So I got the overnight. I'm at the center of the week 0 universe, and hopefully, at least for my sake, at least the result will be more relevant than it was for Northwestern and Nebraska last year.
Have you made that trip before? I assume you've been over there.
I did. Yeah, I went in 2012 when Notre Dame played there against Navy. I went on that trip. I mean, Dublin's incredible. Like I was shocked about like what kind of turnout they had for the game. I thought maybe it would just sort of be something that was happening and people in Dublin wouldn't really know what was going on. But the city definitely got behind it. Maybe Notre Dame has something to do with that. There's a bit of a connection there. So it's like definitely is kind of one of those things where Notre Dame they turn out for this as if it was like the college football playoff. It's kind of treated as a major bowl game for the Notre Dame fan base.
Audrey, how excited are you for football?
Very. I think it's also nice to not be Pete and to be able to get a few games in on the couch this weekend because we just we don't get that opportunity during the fall, right? It's like you're looking at it, and I'm trying to gear up for Penn State's week 1 game against West Virginia, a night game out of the gate. So forget the sleep schedule after that; it'll be brutal. But yeah, I'm very excited. But yeah, Pete's got the game that I think we all want to watch most this week. So that'll be nice to be able to catch that from the couch.
All right, let's get into it. We're going to go contenders, kind of pretenders. We're going to go best case, worst case scenario for 4 or 5 teams in each of these 3 conferences. Kind of how far can they go, or what happens if things go wrong. We're going to start in the Big Ten. We're going to start with Michigan, the 2-time defending Big Ten champions. My question, I guess, let me start off, Audrey. I'm curious what you think. Is Michigan at the point now where anything but a CFP berth this year and maybe even a win is a disappointment? Is that what Michigan has gotten to now in these last 2 years?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. It's like you had to slay the dragon that is Ohio State. They've done that. You look at it this year, they are hands down the Big Ten's best team. And this is a team, anything short of a playoff berth. You say, okay, what was the point of this year, right? They are at that point. And it's also a compliment that we're saying that, right? Because I think a lot of times you say that in fan bases, or, then why even play the games anyway, blah, blah, blah. Well, when you get to that level, you're in that elite echelon. That's the goal, right? I mean, every team, of course, is going to say, oh, yeah, playoff or bust for us. But realistically, there are probably a handful, maybe 8, 9 teams that can make that argument. And Michigan absolutely is one of those. I mean, gosh, Chris, look at those running backs. Like, how do you look at that and say, oh, yeah, they're just content to kind of float along? And I feel like it's not a worst case scenario already, but you're not going to have your head coach for 3 games. And does that Does that even matter when you consider who they're playing? I don't think so.
I don't think it matters against East Carolina and Bowling Green, and I forgot who the other one was. But yeah,
they're gonna call on you to be the guy. I don't think, as of when we're recording this, I don't think they've named an interim yet.
They have not. But I'm curious with Michigan. I mean, Jim Harbaugh, I think, has said they could break Georgia's record for NFL draft picks. I mean, Jim Nagy with the Senior Bowl sees as many as 7 draftable offensive linemen there. This might be the most talented team in the country by the end of the year when we're talking NFL draft next year. So ceiling feels like national championship. Obviously, I mean, obviously they're feeling bad about that TCU game, the game they feel like they should have won, made too many mistakes. But Pete, when you look at Michigan, does it feel like national championship caliber type of team?
It does to me. As you sort of see the way the roster is put together, they've gotten older at quarterback and running back with, JJ McCarthy gives them something that other quarterbacks have not given them. And I have to give Harbaugh a ton of credit because, I mean, how many programs in the country would say not making the playoff is a disaster? And mean it. And really, to me, it's just Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. And like the fact that Michigan has played their way into that kind of self-regard, which Michigan definitely has, like full credit to them for getting there, because I think they're at the point where like you would have to, it's almost like you got to split hairs on like, if you made the playoff and lost a game, could that be a successful season? Well, maybe if it was like sort of a Georgia, Ohio State style of game, but that's kind of it. Like they really have a small margin for error this season to consider it a success. And it's got to be in the playoff. And I think it's almost got to be winning a playoff game, if not losing sort of one of those classic type of semifinals that we don't get that often.
Yeah. Now what's the worst case scenario for Michigan? What is the floor here? Is it 10-2? You lose to Penn State, you lose to Ohio State. Audrey, you'll be covering the Penn State game. I mean, those 3 games, Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, playing against each other, feel like they're probably going to determine the Big Ten. So worst case scenario, 10-2 probably, and you miss the playoff and you don't win the Big Ten East. Audrey?
No, to me, that absolutely feels like it. Feels like 10-2 would be a massive, massive letdown. But yeah, the game with Penn State, that's the one that you kind of circle, especially if you're Penn State, that's your shot. I've already gone on the record with this. I think Penn State goes 11-1, and I think that one loss comes to Michigan, and I don't think it's going to be particularly close. I think you just look at the way that they are able to run the ball. I mean, they absolutely manhandled this Penn State team last year, and Penn State's going to have one of the best defenses in the country, right? So you're coming to Happy Valley, but still, to me, that is like, if you lose that game, then I think you got to put everything into question. But Ohio State's still coming to your place. So you do have that as well. But yeah, it's crazy to say, but yeah, 10-2 to me definitely sounds like a disappointment for Michigan.
Now let's jump to, sorry, go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that would just feel so empty and hollow for Michigan. And considering how they were trying to get back to being a consistent 10-win team forever, I think that would sort of leave just a very empty, hollow feeling in Ann Arbor. So
let's jump to Ohio State, which was 1 field goal away from playing for the national championship. They probably win the national championship if they make that field goal against Georgia. That's how close they were. Instead, you lose. And now the only thing we're talking about with Ohio State is you've lost 2 straight games to Michigan in pretty much blowout fashion, and you got to go to Ann Arbor this year. Ceiling, best case scenario, ceiling for Ohio State, as it is every year, I assume, is national championship. I think we all agree on that. The floor is similar to Michigan, probably 10-2. You lose to Penn State, you lose to Michigan again. Quarterback situation, replacing him doesn't work out. Audrey, when you have Penn State beating Ohio State, then I mean, what do you make of the Buckeyes in best case, worst case right now?
Well, here we are. We're recording this on August 22nd, and Ohio State has not announced who their quarterback is. And Ryan Day said, they're going to kind of let this go on as long as they need to. Well, to me, that's problematic, right? If you have 2 quarterbacks right now, you do not have one. And to me, that's why I think other teams are within striking distance, that other team being Penn State, because you have that instability at quarterback. And that's not something that we've said about Ohio State, especially not under Ryan Day. You look at the guys that they've churned out now. Chris, with that being said, there is still a ton of talent on this roster. You know, you don't overlook that. You don't overlook Marvin Harrison Jr. But to me, the fact that your most important position on the field, your most critical position, is still up in the air here in late August, that tells me that either Kyle McCord's got to step it up, or maybe he is not the guy. And to me, that's interesting because I think a lot of us, you go back, you look at his recruitment. You know, he was at St. Joe's Prep, which is a Pennsylvania school that a lot of New Jersey guys go to, and everybody was looking at the Marvin Harrison, Kyle McCord reunion at Ohio State, and I don't know if we're going to see that or not. But yeah, to me right now, it's like, okay, this unbeatable machine that has seemingly been Ohio State recently now is starting to look a little bit human, and that to me is really what leaves the door open for a team like a Penn State.
Now,
Well, that's like for me, the game that I'm most interested to cover for Notre Dame is when Ohio State comes here, because it's whether it's McCord or Brown, whatever they do at quarterback. Okay, you're going to have a start at Indiana, like Bloomington. Is that like a true hostile road environment? Not really. Then Youngstown State in Western Kentucky. Then you just drop into South Bend on a sort of a primetime night game. Like that's, and in the same way, I felt like Notre Dame did not have a realistic path to beat Ohio State last year. And this year, I don't feel that way at all. I feel like with Sam Hartman, they have a puncher's chance to take them down. And, you know, so that the worst case is suddenly becomes Notre Dame and Penn State and Michigan, and the quarterback doesn't work out. Like that's a much lower floor than I think what Michigan has. You could see Ohio State for how much talent they have. Maybe things just get off to, like, you lose at Notre Dame. Suddenly when's the last time Ohio State was feeling like real season crisis pressure on October 1st? It's been a long, long time, but I think that might be how it would feel if they lost at Notre Dame at the end of September.
It'd probably be 2011, the year after the tattoo stuff, and they go 6-7, and Luke Fickell's the interim head coach. The only bad season Ohio State has had for like half a century at this point. Pete, that Ohio State Notre Dame game last year was odd. I think if I recall correctly, Notre Dame was leading at halftime. Is that right?
They were lit. I think on the Ohio State took the lead for good on maybe the final play of the third quarter. And it felt like it felt like you were watching an NCAA tournament game between like a 3 seed and a 13 seed. And like the 13 seed is just like, they're controlling pace. Like clearly they're not as good as the better seeded team. But I loved like Notre Dame's game plan, but like they had to concede. It was Tyler Buckner versus CJ Stroud at quarterback. Like that was a blowout. Now it's Sam Hartman versus a TBD quarterback for Ohio State. That's not. I mean, you could argue that Notre Dame will have the quarterback advantage in that game, I think, pretty easily. And it's been a while since Notre Dame's played a game like that and felt like they had the advantage of quarterback. And you always, if you're playing at home and you have the better quarterback, you've got a chance to win that game.
Yeah, the reports out of Ohio State seem to be that coaches are split on McCord and Brown, but like in a positive way, like they've both played well. So we'll see. It's really that Notre Dame game when we'll find out. And coaches and staffs can believe things until we see it on the field in the game. And neither of these guys have much game experience to lean back on. Now let's jump over to Penn State. Audrey, I'm going to open the floor to you. You have written a story that this is the year Penn State has to do it. They have to beat some combination of Michigan, Ohio State. This is the best Penn State team we've seen in quite a while. So the floor is yours here. Tell me Penn State, best case, worst case. You're the expert on this.
Best case scenario, they make the playoff. Now that to me seems a year too early still. I think 2024, when you look at it with the expanded field with a roster that at that point is going to have a bunch of juniors on it, to me, that's like the more realistic year. But hey, you said best case scenario, Chris. So I think that to me is, hey, you know what? Would they get in at 11-1 if you keep it close with Michigan? To me, that's where whatever happens in that game, the margin there is going to be really significant. But I do think this is a team that beats Ohio State. You got to go to Columbus. And I think the interesting thing here now, I feel like, Chris, kind of the funny part to the Ohio State side of this is, okay, we could all be wrong, right? And Ohio State just continues to roll out another incredible quarterback, and we're all just sitting here saying, yeah, we should have seen it coming. But the other side of that is that Penn State has Drew Aller, the kid from Medina, Ohio, who grew up as an Ohio State fan, who now all of a sudden, Penn State has yet to officially name him the starter, but I mean, all intents and purposes, he's been the guy. He was Sean Clifford's backup last year when he burned his red shirt as a freshman. So you get Drew Aller, you get him in the horseshoe, you see what happens. I think he's going to be really good. I think they also have a ton of talent around him. You look at their running backs. To me, this is one of the best backfields in the country. I will default to Michigan and say that they are one, and Penn State is maybe two, with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. So these guys are going to be really good. You look at just what Penn State has compiled. Bruce Feldman's Freaks list came out last week. Penn State has 6 guys on it. And you look at that and you say, man, that's 6 guys, but there's so many other players in my head that I'm saying, yeah, this guy's going to do really well. You're talking about 3 potential first-round draft picks, potentially the best offensive tackle in all of college football with Penn State's left tackle. So this is a really, really good team, James Franklin's best team. But I say all of that, and I project 11-1, but I say that with a team that we're saying, yeah, Drew Aller still hasn't started a game yet. So that, to me, Chris, that's how I arrived at my 11-1.
Now, what if it doesn't go well? What if Drew Aller is not the guy, or it takes them a while to get going? What is, say they lose those 2 games again, Michigan, Ohio State? Are there other spots where they could trip up, or is 10-2 feel like the floor?
Iowa comes here for the whiteout game, so you have that. Which the whiteout is a different beast. So you say that. To me, the trap game is going to Illinois because you get the weird start time. It's like that 11 o'clock Central start. Chris, I still have horrible flashbacks of the 9 overtime, watching them up and down the field and like, oh my gosh, this game will never end.
Horrible flashbacks. That was an instant classic.
Yeah, I'm sitting there like, come on, man, what do we got to do? I actually had friends in town that weekend, was trying to get out of the game as fast as possible. So of course we got 9 overtimes. But yeah, I think you look at it and you say, okay, Penn State historically under James Franklin, it's the snowball effect. They lose one game, then they have that slip up where you say, okay, you get that Illinois 9 overtime loss like they've had before. I think if you're them, 10-2 yet again, you say this is a disappointment because at some point, enough's enough, right? Like at some point you have to get into that upper echelon. Which to me, it feels like where Michigan was at a few years ago, right? It was, can they beat Ohio State? Can they get into that elite level? And they've done that, where for Penn State, they've had really good, really successful seasons, but they just haven't been able to get to that next level. So yeah, for me, I mean, again, this is all projecting on a young quarterback. You're only ever one injury away. Penn State's backup quarterback to Drew Aller, presumably, again, once he's named, would be Bo Pribula, who also has not started a game. He enrolled at the same time as Aller. So you've got a lot of uncertainty there at the quarterback position, but you've also got a ton of talent on this roster. So kind of how you marry that to me is the question. And they get West Virginia out of the gate. So it's not like you're really easing into things. It's a night game. You're going to get the NBC rollout. So Beaver Stadium at night, it'll be rocking, I'm sure. But again, this is not like we're just really stepping into this.
Pete, what do you think about Big Ten on NBC? I've seen a lot of the commercials. Pretty good song. They got the Fall Out Boy song. Pretty good rollout. As someone who is a Notre Dame guy around the NBC, what do you think about Big Ten NBC?
I mean, I know Notre Dame loves it because they feel like they were sort of on an island for the longest time where it was the only property NBC had. So I think it will be a good sort of marriage between, Notre Dame games and Big Ten games happening there. And, sometimes you get Ohio State at Notre Dame, which is both. So it's, eventually Notre Dame at USC will be essentially a Big Ten / non-conference game. So I think it's a good match. I like that. I like Todd Blackledge, just like his style of announcing. So I think he'll be a good A-team hire for them. Because that's, I think for Notre Dame fans, they wanted NBC to invest more consistently in their broadcasting crew. I mean, there was a while when Mike Tirico was calling the games, which was incredible. But I think Blackledge and Eagle will be very good, sort of feeling like it's a big deal when NBC is broadcasting your game.
Audrey, I wanted to ask you about Ari Wasserman's Penn State take, which we got into a little thing on Twitter about it. He's not here to defend himself, to be fair. You told Ari and me to get some air because we were going after this. It's a take he's had for a while, which was that Penn State should have started Drew Aller last year gone through all the ups and downs, so he would be seasoned and ready coming into this season when you can make a 4-team college football playoff. They go on with Sean Clifford. They win the Rose Bowl. It's a great year. I'm of the belief of like, there's a lot you can take out of what they did, winning the Rose Bowl, beating Utah on the big stage, that helps those young guys, those young running backs in year 2. Not to say Drew Aller couldn't have done it, but I don't know. Where do you fall on this whole thing that Ari? It's an interesting opinion. The idea that not that you're but you're kind of sacrificing the potential of one year to focus on the next year.
Yeah, it felt like you were kind of punting on the season if you would have done that. I mean, the thing is, Aller still had, I want to say, like 60 pass attempts last year. So it's not like he was there holding the clipboard all year and never played. So you do have that. I understand Ari's point, but where I think it veers off course, and I'm imagining him fuming as I say this somewhere walking around, but I think where it gets off course is Penn State knew exactly what it was going to do when it said to Sean Clifford, "We want you back for year 6." Because at that point, it did not matter. Like, you knew you were getting Drew Aller there that January, but he was not going to be your guy. They were dedicated to running this thing back with Sean Clifford. And I'll tell you, this is where I do side with Ari, that I thought that was the wrong decision when they did that. I thought, you know what, you've seen everything that you've seen out of Sean Clifford. It's going to be a roller coaster ride. And it was. I mean, it ended on the highest possible note. But there were a lot of rough patches in between there. You know, you look at that Purdue game that they lost, but then almost won because of Sean Clifford. It was just the full experience. But to me, like, it was just never a viable option because they wanted to have a 6th-year quarterback come back to be the guy. Now, if you're sitting here at this point and say they didn't do that and Sean Clifford was never here last year, right? He would have gone on, done whatever, right? Probably wouldn't be a Green Bay Packer right now, which is a whole other end and angle of this thing for me. But if this never happens, I do think you're sitting here right now and saying, okay, we know exactly what we have. You feel a little bit better about that. But I think, Chris, where you side is you see a 10-win season and a Rose Bowl as a successful season. I think most fans, or a good number of fans, feel you on that regard, right? They think that's a great season, it's a successful season, where I feel like Ari's thing has always been it's national championship or bust, right? And I think that's where we get these two conflicting things, where I would say, you know what, 10-2 for the team that they had with all the strides and growth they showed with an otherwise young roster when you take away the 6th-year quarterback. I think that's where you say it was a good season. Keeping Sean Clifford was the right call. But I get Ari's argument, but I just think it's tough to say, hey, you're going to almost punt on a season and go with the freshman quarterback who got here months prior. That's tough to do. And I think you kind of look at the other side of that as well and say, you know what if Drew Aller struggles last year, right? We saw that with Christian Hackenberg. You throw him in there as a true freshman, his whole career derails. Like, to me, that's the other side of this. And that's where I think it's easy to say, oh, yeah, Drew could have done that. They would have been great. And maybe Ari's right on that, but I think you have to say long-term, I'm still thinking back to covering Hackenberg when he gets sacked left and right, and you get the highly coveted guy who just doesn't pan out for whatever reason. I do think that's part of it. So I think they played it well. I mean, obviously, hindsight, I think you take last year more times than not, but absolutely for Penn State this year, you have to get one of those two marquee opponents. You got to beat either Ohio State or Michigan. But yeah, I think Drew Aller's going to be special. I think he's a really good, really talented quarterback. I will go as far, Chris, as to say that I think by the end of this season, he's going to be among the 5 best quarterbacks in college football.
Wow. That's some high praise for Drew Aller, a guy Ari also really much believes in. So we'll see if they figure that out quickly. Let's wrap up the Big Ten here with the West Division, looking at 2 teams, Wisconsin, Iowa. I think Wisconsin might be the most interesting team in the country. To go to basically say, look, winning 10 games a year and winning division championships is not enough. We have to be more. And to hire Luke Fickell, who took a group of 5 team to the playoff, and to have Phil Longo come in, bring in three transfer quarterbacks they added. Tanner Mordecai can air it out. They still got Braylon Allen at running back. Like, there's a chance if this all clicks for Wisconsin, I could see like an 11-1 type of season, regular season, maybe win the Big Ten, maybe make the playoff. Like, that's how high I think the ceiling is. The floor is much lower, maybe 7-5. The coaching changes causes problems. Tanner Mordecai throws a bunch of interceptions like he did at SMU. So kind of low floor, high ceiling for Wisconsin with this change. Pete, I'm kind of curious what you think of Wisconsin.
I mean, I love Luke Fickell. In a different world, he's Notre Dame's head coach right now. But timing is what it was. I don't think the ceiling is quite as high as you with, what they have coming back. So, but West champs, sure. College football playoff, that would, my brain would explode on that one. CJ Williams, the transfer from USC, I'm very curious to sort of see how he shakes out there. Didn't really get on the field, but was a big time prospect. I could see the floor, being 7-5 though, based on I'm not saying this is like Georgia Tech going from Paul Johnson, and getting rid of the triple option and rebuild, but Wisconsin had an MO and an identity, and what Longo is going to do offensively is totally different. So I'm with you. I think Wisconsin is one of the most interesting teams in the country. I think what's reasonable expectation, it's probably like a 5-win swing, which I don't think we would say that for a lot of different teams. So I'm fascinated by them, but I would not place a bet one way or the other on whatever their over/under win total is.
Audrey, what do you think about Wisconsin?
I should know what the over/under win total is, Pete, because I did a story on that. That's posting this week on The Athletic. But what I will say is I was just sitting over here. I was pulling up their schedule while Pete was talking, and they get Ohio State this year at the end of October. When we go back, we said Ohio State, the floor, the ceiling, sneaky good game. To me, that's going to be really interesting because you want to see what that measuring stick is. I'm with you guys. I think like Luke Fickell was a slam dunk hire. You look at it, to me, it's like, okay, they just felt so stale, right? Like you just started to watch Wisconsin and like your eyes would start to kind of glaze over and you're like, oh my gosh, this team's putting me to sleep. But I'm excited about them. And I think you look at it too, it's always going to be built around running the ball, and they're going to run the ball really well. They got one of the best running backs in the country. But to me, I'm really curious what Tanner Mordecai does. You look at what he was able to do at SMU. Just a tremendous pickup. You look at using the transfer portal to retool your roster and to do it quickly. That's something that I feel like they've been able to do. There it is. Cam's going with the 8.5. Our producer, that over under 8.5 for per bet MGM. So I said over in our story. So some free advice from yours truly on that one. I do believe in them, but yeah, Chris, I think you are way off base if you think they're making the playoff. I think you've been hanging with Ari too much if you think that's true. But I do very well see this team being one that can win the West, because let's be honest, right? Like, can Iowa really push them? Do either of you guys believe that?
I mean, don't you think Iowa is just like such a fully functional program except for the offense? But what you're getting there at least, whereas Wisconsin is just like, who the heck knows what they're going to be? So I could see Iowa getting them this year, and that might be the last time Iowa gets Wisconsin for a while. So for all the jokes we make about Iowa, they have won at least 8 games, since 2015. They've won at least 8 games every year, except for 2020 COVID year. They go 6-2. This is for all the jokes about the offense. This was not Stanford, which was winning 3 games and completely fell apart. This is still a good program that will win 8-9 games in a given year. As we look at that, obviously we're going to talk about the race to 25 points per game and Brian Ferentz keeping his job. I mean, the best case scenario is that Brian Ferentz keeps his job, and in a way that is obvious, in a way that they scored 30-something points per game. Caden McNamara fits, and they take care of the things on the schedule. The worst case scenario for Iowa is that Brian Ferentz keeps his job just barely over the threshold. That is the problem and the interest about having 25 points per game, going to a bowl game and stuff like that. Having these requirements, could easily see Iowa average exactly 25 points per game and go 7-5. And then if you're Iowa, you're stuck, at that point. So
it's a weird spot with them. It's a high floor for Iowa. It has to be because they're always pretty solid. But I am also curious, kind of these gambling issues. We should be finding out pretty soon here, kind of the number of players suspended. We've seen over at Iowa State, number of starters are out or have left the team because of this. We don't know yet at Iowa what that fallout will be. So, I mean, like, floor for me is probably like a 7-5 type of year again, unless there's some suspensions we don't know about. But you could also see them winning the West if it doesn't work out for Wisconsin.
I sort of like their ceiling is 9-3, their floor is 9-3. Their best case scenario is they actually finish with 324 points, and their worst case scenario is they finish with 325, and Brian Ferentz is back. Like, I think if Scott Docterman was on the show, he may tell us off air that the best case scenario is they're forced to make a change at offensive coordinator, but they still win 9 games.
Yeah, that's probably it. That's probably the best case scenario right there. You win 9 games, but you don't score 25 points per game, and you can make a change at offensive coordinator, I guess. So, Audrey, any other thoughts on Iowa in the Big Ten?
No, I mean, I just think obviously the whole scoring, the points per game thing is going to be such a sideshow this year. How excited are you guys, or not excited are you? Because that storyline's going to be beaten to death, but it's going to be a lot of fun. But also, like, Iowa, what in the world were you thinking making that public? Like, to me, that's one of those things behind closed doors. You say, hey, man, this is what you got to do to keep your job. But to put that in a contract in writing, it's why this sport is the best, because it's just complete chaos. So I look forward to seeing, like, who creatively tracks this, right? Because there's no way they're going to do something in the stadium for it. But you guys both know damn well fans are going to be all over it. Can you imagine, like, a ticker in the stadium?
I mean, I just keep wondering, like, those non-conference games, if you're blowing a team out, like, do you run up the score?
Yeah.
Just for the sake of your son's job.
I still contend like special teams and defensive points should not count, but it sounds like they're gonna lump that in.
I agree. This team had, I tracked how many defensive touchdowns and special teams. It was ridiculous last year. Almost as, I think they had more than passing touchdowns total. So that's the Big Ten. Audrey, was there anything else about the Big Ten before we let you go that you think about contenders or pretenders?
Nope. Think that's everything.
All righty, Audrey. Thanks for joining us. It'll be me and Pete here taking it the rest of the way. We're going to jump into the Big 12, which is the most top to bottom, probably the toughest Power 5 league to figure out, I think. Kansas State won it last year. TCU played in the national championship game. You know, like, who saw any of that coming? But we have to start with Texas. Is Texas back? I know listeners are probably sick and tired of hearing about this. And if they lose to Alabama in week 2, you probably don't have to anymore. But it feels like this has to be the year for Texas. All the pieces are there. Quinn Ewers should take a good step forward. He's healthy. He was solid when he was healthy last year. The offensive line has grown into place. The defense should be able to make some more plays. This is the year for Texas to win the Big 12. It's the last possible year. And I know Ari was thinking playoff for them. Manny, in our oddly specific predictions episode, said Texas gets the number 2 seed, I think, in the CFP. So they are high on the Longhorns. I think it's possible, but I think it's going to be really difficult in a Big 12 that week in and week out, you could lose to anybody in this conference in a given week.
I think it will be the most Texas thing ever when they beat Alabama, but then lose to Houston later in the year. That will be the ultimate Texas back, not back storyline. Because it's like Alabama is they are very vulnerable right now. If you sort of read some of our coverage on The Athletic about the quarterback situation down there, it's not going as they expected.
No,
for Tommy Rees. So that makes Alabama very vulnerable to Texas. But the rest of the season, it's such a funky schedule. So you look through Big 12 schedules, it looks like they're playing non-conference games in the middle of the conference slate, but then you forget actually BYU and Houston are in the conference now. It's really a weird year there. And if any team is going to feel like they got jobbed on the road by the officiating crew, it's going to be Texas and Oklahoma. They're going to get no favors the rest of the way. I don't know if the league will allow either of them to win the conference championship on their way out.
There's going to be horns down everywhere, and the refs are just going to.
Oh, yeah, the refs will be doing horns down at some point. So I think that they will probably be a top 10 team at some point in September after they beat Alabama, and then probably still end up finishing 9-3. And you're feeling a little bit hollow there at the end.
My biggest concern with Texas is that the recent history of Texas and Steve Sarkisian. Steve Sarkisian in 10 years, 9 years as a head coach has never won more than 8 games in the regular season. He's only won more than 8 games once, and it was first year at USC. He goes 9-4, and they win the Holiday Bowl. But when he was at Washington, he was 7-win Sark. That was the nickname.
Yeah.
He goes 5-7, 7-6, 7-6, 7-6, 8-4, and then he gets the USC job, gets fired after a 3-2 start, and obviously some off the field issues in 2015. So like we've never seen Steve Sarkisian take a team really overachieve. We've never seen him overachieve as a head coach. And that's kind of what Texas is going to need to do in a very difficult conference. I think floor, you're thinking maybe like 8-4, 7-5 doesn't work for Quinn Ewers. He gets benched. Arch Manning or Malik Murphy, it doesn't work either. The defense gives up a lot. That would be my concern with Texas.
Yeah, they have not been sort of killers on the line of scrimmage for a long time down there. I mean, it's felt like a very sort of finesse offense, a finesse program, frankly, like that looks good and the NILs are great, but it's just like, it's very pretty down there. And I think you can get Alabama one time with sort of playing that style, but I think to grind a way through an entire schedule, you're going to have to get much tougher on the lines than Texas has been. So that stops you from, I think, the number 2 seed in the college football playoff. But it does make you very dangerous in a one-off against Alabama that has a lot of quarterback issues to sort out.
Yeah. Let's jump over to Oklahoma. I was at the 49-0 Red River shootout last year when Oklahoma didn't have a quarterback and Texas blew them out of the water. It feels like Oklahoma is a team that could be primed for a bounce back year after going 6-7 because they lost so many one-score games, because they had so many quarterback injuries. I think if Dillon Gabriel stays healthy and the defense makes the improvement you would think, you're thinking maybe 10-2 type of year. Floor, it doesn't work out. They play SMU week 2. Could be a sneaky game there. That's a pay-per-view only game for Oklahoma. Like if SMU has things figured out, maybe they surprise them. The defense is an issue and they continue to lose one-score games. But I don't know. Like I did not expect Oklahoma to be in this position with Brent Venables as head coach, kind of at 1 year out from the SEC. They've been recruiting better, but 1 year in, things have only gotten worse. So Oklahoma has to have a big bounce back year.
Yeah, I feel like there should be a lot of pressure on Venables, not like in a hot seat way or anything, but just that debut season was not something I saw coming. Like as a first-time head coach, not that he was a sure thing, but he was kind of close to it at a program that had just won consistently over and over again. And I'll be curious to sort of like see how he reinvents himself. It's like the Dillon Gabriel injury obviously was big. Jackson Arnold, a freshman quarterback. You talk to coaches around college football. Some will tell you he was actually the number 1 overall prospect at that position. Can he give you something if you need it? You're right. I think they're recruiting really well down there. I think they're recruiting as if they're about to join a new league. But in some ways, I feel like despite the Venables year 1 blip, I'm almost more confident that Oklahoma will hit its ceiling than Texas is.
Yeah, I mean, they've been the most consistent team in the league for a while outside of one bad year. I mean, Oklahoma in general, you go back like 50 years, outside of a brief blip in the 90s, they don't stay down. They never stay down. Texas's history is at a lower level than what Oklahoma's has been. So we'll see if history plays out that way again. Let's jump to, the team that played for the national championship last year, TCU. What kind of encore do we get from the Horned Frogs? They lose Max Duggan. They lose Kendre Miller. They lose Quentin Johnson. They lose a lot of skill guys. Now, we could have never predicted a run to the national championship for TCU, so like anything feels possible. But I think Big 12 champion is a reasonable ceiling for them again, because one, they've done it, but two, Chandler Morris taking over a quarterback there. He won the job last year out of camp. He beat Max Duggan as the starting quarterback. He just got hurt in the first game. Max Duggan comes in and becomes a Heisman runner-up. But even during the season, TCU coaches would say, like, look, Chandler Morris has been better in practice, but Max Duggan's just doing what he's doing during games. We can't not play him. So I think if Chandler Morris plays to the potential that he could, they're able to find pieces at running back and receiver, and they continue that development, could have another big year, championship type of year.
Yeah, and I think they will sort of have, I don't want to say artificially inflated, but they start with Colorado. We're all going to be watching that for reasons that don't have much to do with TCU. And I think TCU will probably roll them. But it's like their last 3 games are Texas, Baylor, and Oklahoma. Like that's legit at the end. And you think about, I mean, one of the iconic images to me last season was Max Duggan, like essentially almost expiring in the end zone of the Big 12 championship game. Like they rode him, and they rode him hard. And like it's usually can't win that way, because usually you almost never have players like that. You never have them twice in a row at the same position. So I feel like there's definitely a regression coming for TCU. Yeah, if everything went right, maybe you're 10-2 and sneaking into the Big 12 championship game, but it feels like they're much more of like, you're back to historical norms here, where look, 8-4 that's solid. Like that's not a disappointment. Maybe it is the year after going to the college football playoff, but I think that would still be a really good season for them.
Yeah, I low floor. I mean, 6-6 maybe, something like that, because when Sonny Dykes lost Jared Goff at Cal, they plummeted again the next year. So we'll see what happens there. Their schedule will be favorable. They don't really have any tough games until those final 3. Those final 4 actually, or 5. Kansas State, Texas Tech, Texas, Baylor, Oklahoma to close the season. So they will have time to kind of get it all together. Let's talk about the team that actually won the Big 12 last year. Kansas State got to replace Deuce Vaughn and some receivers. They've got Keegan Johnson from Iowa who transferred in. Ceiling, again, I mean, like, I think 5 or 6 teams in this conference could win the Big 12. I don't see Kansas State making the playoff, but I could see another Big 12 championship if Will Howard plays like he did in the second half of last season, and the other pieces fill in. This is a team that's kind of like Iowa, always going to be consistently solid. It just, do you get enough on offense to have a big year, or do you not? So ceiling, Big 12 champs. Floor, again, could be something like 6-6. You lose. They've got Troy and Missouri in the non-conference. Those could be sneaky, difficult games. Maybe Will Howard regresses. So anywhere from 6-6 to Big 12 champs, I think is possible.
Yeah, I would say so. 6-6 would surprise me, just because their coaching staff, I think, is probably one of the most underrated in the country. Like the job that they do there is outstanding. So to backslide all the way to 6-6 would shock me. But kind of the 8-4, 9-3, like toward the, if you just said, all right, Texas and Kansas State one off, who are you putting your money on? Like I would put it on Kansas State, just based on the way the program is run and who's coaching it. So I have a hard time seeing them going all the way back to the pack, but they're just a really well-run program. I think that's obvious to anybody who watches their games.
Kansas State was the dark horse for everybody last year in the Big 12, and we kind of forgot about that when TCU went on the run that they went on, but Kansas State did end up winning the Big 12. This year's dark horse, that everybody's dark horse for the Big 12, Texas Tech, program that had a really solid first year under Joey McGuire. Tyler Shuck is back and healthy at quarterback. I think the ceiling is, again, like Big 12 championship. Probably not I don't see a playoff coming out of this, but Tyler Shuck, who returns to form, he had 8 touchdowns, 1 interception in those final 4 games. They were 4-0 to close the year. I think that's best case scenario. Worst case, you lose to Oregon week 2. You lose to Texas, maybe TCU, maybe Shuck gets hurt again. Probably like a 7-5 again type of floor. So very similar with a lot of these teams, but Texas Tech is the dark horse for everybody. What do you think of the Red Raiders?
I'm more in the floor camp here. Like I don't think that they have the depth up and down the roster, and you sort of see the way their recruiting classes get picked apart late by bigger schools that come in and sort of take their commits. Like that's been going on for a long time. And I think it stops you from hitting the ceiling that you've got, whether it be 11-1 or 10-2 or competing for the Big 12 championship. But Texas Tech, I mean, historically that program kind of one night in Lubbock, they can get you. So it wouldn't surprise me if they had a great moment or two this season, but I don't think that they're going to be a program that we're going to talk about as like in the conversation for the Big 12 much past, mid-late October.
I mean, one night in Lubbock, Oregon, week 2 is coming. That week 2 is so weird because
maybe that's the night. Yeah.
Alabama, Texas is going to get all the attention that week, but Oregon going to Lubbock, 6 p.m. game is going to be fascinating. I'm going to try to get out there. I don't know if I can, but the rest of the schedule early on is somewhat favorable. But again, in this conference, like West Virginia beat Oklahoma last year, like anything can happen. So Big 12 is going to be one of the most interesting conferences in the country, I think, because of that. I think you're thinking like high ceiling, low floor for a lot of these schools. And again, they played for the national championship last year on a team that didn't go to a bowl game the year before. So I think it just kind of goes to show what happens in this conference. Let's finish up with the ACC, which is part of the reason that you're here, even though Notre Dame is mostly a member of the ACC, just not in football. Clemson. Notre Dame's got Clemson this year. It's a team that obviously expects to make the playoff every year right now. Cade Klubnik, takes over last year, plays okay, not a great Orange Bowl. They bring in Garrett Riley from TCU to be the offense coordinator. I think ceiling for Clemson is obviously you make it back to the playoff and maybe win a game. And Klubnik and Riley click. You get Florida State, Notre Dame, and UNC all at home. I think it's very easy to see that again. The floor is probably, again, like a 10-2, like kind of like what they did last year. You lose to Florida State and maybe Notre Dame, but you still play for the ACC championship. Pete, as someone Notre Dame's going to play Clemson this year, what do you think?
Yeah, I feel like of all Notre Dame's games, I feel like the one at Clemson is their most difficult. In part because of the way Notre Dame put it on them last year, which I do wonder if sort of like this aura of invincibility was punctured at Clemson last year, and it's just hard to put that back together. I couldn't believe what I was watching when I saw Clemson just get manhandled against a team that I think Drew Pine finished the game with like 80 yards passing. Like it was not, they weren't even trying to challenge them through the air, which Sam Hartman earlier in the year did just fine. I wonder if something is just a little bit off at Clemson. Garrett Riley is, part of putting it back together, but I think defensively they just have taken a big step back, and they lost a ton from last year's team. So I feel like the floor is below 10-2 because you're going to have Florida State, Notre Dame, North Carolina, and the ACC title. The way that the conference has changed now, we're getting away. Like you can have Clemson, Florida State part 2. And so that is another floor, because I don't think in the past we would ever think Clemson, even a bad Clemson team, they're going to win the ACC title based on the opponent more than themselves. So, 12-0 feels like kind of a reach with a first-year quarterback and a first-year coordinator. So I would say ceiling maybe is more 11-1, and floor is, I guess, 10-3 with the ACC title game loss as part of it. Right.
Now that the ACC doesn't have divisions, Florida State and Clemson, they're not competing for the same division championship, and whoever wins that wins the division. They can play a second time. I think that's what gives Clemson and Florida State an extra bump, is that they can lose that game and still win the championship. So that plays into things. And to your point, last year, Sam Hartman against Clemson, 20 for 29, 337 yards, 6 touchdowns in a 51-45 double overtime loss. So, yeah, Clemson, we've seen, can be taken apart in the passing game. Tennessee did it too in the Orange Bowl. So that is a major concern. And Clemson has just lacked the explosiveness at wide receiver that they've had for a number of years before that. Florida State, is this the year that they're kind of the trendy playoff pick, ACC championship pick? Mike Norvell has built that team over the last couple of years into a very prominent program. Jordan Travis could be a Heisman Trophy candidate. Jared Verse, one of the best pass rushers in the country. Florida State, Pete, what do you make of the Noles? Do you believe the hype? Is this the year Florida State is back, or is it, or is the fact that they have LSU week 1 and Clemson a few weeks later, is that going to put a damper on things pretty quickly?
I like Florida State to make the playoff. I think they're going to put it together this year. And I think that they could lose to LSU and still do it, because I think LSU may also make the playoff. So I don't think that losing to LSU in a competitive, perhaps less comical game than last year will hurt them in a major way. So I like Jordan Travis a lot. He has played a ton of football. I like Jared Verse off the edge. They've got good skill position guys. I think that Clemson is vulnerable, even though they have to go there. Floor would be high. Yeah, floor is clearly you lose to LSU, you lose to Clemson, maybe you lose to Clemson again in the ACC championship game to go 10-3 or worse. Yeah. But I like Florida State as like a legit playoff contender. That they when it's championship weekend, I think they'll have a chance to play their way in. That's, I think, the kind of season that they're going to have.
Yeah, I mean, I visited them last spring after 2 not great seasons under Norvell, but he was just very confident in what they were building. Their hit rate on transfers is like ridiculous. Like they were telling me last spring, like Jared Verse is going to be one of the best pass rushers in the country. Like we know this, and that was when he was coming from FCS Albany, and now they've got a top 5 recruiting class set right now. Like they're hitting their stride here. I just wonder if you lose a week 1 game to LSU, how you bounce back from that and get ready for Clemson on the road, and then, you have that mulligan kind of again with the ACC situation. I could easily see a spot where maybe they lose those first 2 games, but they win out and then win the ACC, or they lose and then Clemson's a different team by the end of the year. I think that's going to be fascinating if the ACC potentially knocks itself out of a playoff spot, if Florida State and Clemson are so good, if they beat each other once or something like that. So that'll be the key for Florida State. You have them in the playoff. I have them number 6 or 7, I think, in my preseason 130. So it's going to be really interesting. If Florida State is really back, we'll find out week 1. That is easily the most interesting game of the week. One of the most interesting non-conference games of the season. Outside of those 2, who I think are the heavy favorites, obviously, to play for the ACC, what about NC State? It's a program it's been consistent, but it has not really even gotten close to breaking through.
No, and NC State is the moment in Notre Dame's season where you're going to know, like, is Notre Dame good? Because I think when they go to NC State at noon, it's their 3rd game, but week 2. That's going to be a pretty good litmus test for Notre Dame, whether you feel like, okay, you have what it takes to get Ohio State a couple weeks later. Brennan Armstrong is such an enigma to me. I remember covering Notre Dame at Virginia 2 years ago when Robert and I was still the offensive coordinator. Armstrong had a rib injury, and it changed the entire game. Statistically, just what he was able to do in a Nye's offense was just incredible. Nye's at Syracuse last year did some good things with Garrett Schrader, but he got hurt. I don't really know what to expect from NC State. They're like a much less interesting Wisconsin, but similar in the sense of, like, I could see 10-2, I could see 6-6. I don't really know. I think that they have an entire season of wild card games.
The last 9 years for NC State under Dave Doran, they have won between 7 and 9 games 8 times. They had 1 4-8 season in there, but other than that, you're either 7 wins or to 9 wins. They have 2 top 25 finishes. They have always been solidly consistent, but never really that close to breaking through and winning the ACC. And Robert and I, like you mentioned, to me, one of the most intriguing hires of all coordinators, because Brendan Armstrong passed for almost 4,500 yards in 2021 when they were at Virginia. And then last year he's beat up and Virginia is a mess and he's out. So you reunite the 2 of them there. I don't want to say the ceiling is anything like I think the ceiling's like 9 wins because that's just what the ceiling seems to be at NC State. And the floor is probably 7 wins because that's what it always seems to be at NC State. Can they beat a Notre Dame or a Clemson again? Maybe. We'll see. But like you said, it's kind of, they've been almost boringly consistent. You kind of want to see a breakthrough type of season. Like, even if Armstrong doesn't quite click, they're probably winning 7 games. The schedule is pretty favorable. It just comes down to those big games that they never seem to quite get. North Carolina, team that overachieves when we're down on them, and they underachieve when we're thinking highly of them. They're, I think, a preseason top 25 team right now. Drake May, obviously a NFL top prospect at quarterback. They add Devontae Walker, Kent State receiver. They got a couple of weapons there. This feels like another team. Could be a big year, could be a dud year. Like, could be a 10-win season, could be a 6-win season. You think Drake May's talented enough to get them to a big year, but I think Sam Howell was too, and we saw how Sam Howell's last year went.
Yeah, there's no, like, Drake May is outstanding. I loved watching him live last year when Notre Dame went down there, but it's like all the other parts just didn't really fit together. And I don't know why they would fit together any differently this year. It's just not it's a team with like elite quarterback play, and it's finesse, like, but they don't own it on the lines the way that you need to be a consistent winner. And that's not going to change just because Drake May is still there. So I feel like that they're going to be a very underwhelming sort of 7-5, 8-4. I don't see them having the material to hit a ceiling of 11-1 or be a contender for the ACC title. They're just not built that way. The way that the roster's been put together.
New offensive coordinator as well. Chip Lindsey comes in from UCF, former Troy head coach. UCF was pretty good offensively last year, but they had some duds. They lost to Navy. Not the most inspiring hire, I think, when you have potentially the number 1 or number 2 NFL draft pick at quarterback. Let's wrap up ACC with, they obviously won't win the ACC, but Notre Dame. Pete, you're the expert on Notre Dame. Obviously, you have been covering this team forever. And is Sam Hartman the real deal? Is he the answer to the offensive problems they've had the last couple of years? Is he the missing piece for Notre Dame to get back into playoff conversation?
Yeah, I think playoff conversation for sure. But he, if they could have also taken A.T. Perry as a grad transfer, then I might feel quite a bit differently about what Notre Dame's ceiling actually is, because their receiver position just hasn't developed the way that they need it to. But I think Hartman sort of ensures you're not going to have a Marshall Stanford type of game again, because he's too talented to do that. What they need him to do is not have a at Louisville game like he did last year, where it just like the wheels come off a little bit. And in theory, Notre Dame should not be asking its quarterback to do what Wake Forest asks its quarterback to do in terms of carrying the entire offense. But Hartman, I think, has been outstanding in camp. You really don't hear anything from talking to coaches or watching practice that makes you think that he will stumble or stutter in his 1 year here. And it's just a matter of can they get pass rush from the end position? Can they develop a receiver or two to be a number 1 option, opposed to having a roster of number 2s and number 3s? But yeah, ceiling would be 11-1. I think that their best case is, to me, I view it as if you go to Clemson in I think it's their 9th game or their 10th game. If you go to Clemson and you're at 8-1, you're in the playoff conversation at that point. And then you sort of you roll the dice with whatever happens that night. That would be a good season to me. Bad season, or if the floor, you only get one of the 3 big games, and then Marcus Freeman hasn't figured out the Brian Kelly formula to beat every half decent team you play with regularity, and you lose a Louisville or an NC State or Pittsburgh, Duke, I guess. Notre Dame has to get back to sort of sweeping aside the teams that they're clearly more talented than. Brian Kelly did that. He never had a Clemson game like last year where you just blew a great team off the field like that. But Marcus Freeman's chore in year 2 is how do I get a more consistent performance week after week? If you do, that will take care of everyone in the ACC not named Clemson. And then you get Ohio State and USC at home, Clemson on the road. Can you get 2 of those 3? That's the ceiling for me.
What a bizarre! I was just looking back through Notre Dame's schedule. What a bizarre season last year. They lose. They lose to Marshall. They lose to Stanford. They almost blow a big lead against Navy, but they whip Clemson, number 4 Clemson. They beat Syracuse on the road. They beat South Carolina in the bowl game, and they win 9 games. You think if you've got if you think you have better quarterback play, you just don't lose the Marshall and Stanford games. That's a 10-win regular season right there, or something like that.
Yeah,
is it that simple?
They played, but it's like they played great at North Carolina, and they got BYU pretty good, which were not great teams, but good teams. It was just a really bizarre season where I don't think Marcus Freeman sort of had kind of he figured out how to calm the waters a little bit, but I think early in the year they put so much into the Ohio State game for program reasons and probably personal reasons for Freeman having played there. They didn't recover from that well. They were clearly a team that got better as the year went on, but it just never felt like they were maximizing who they were until Clemson showed up, and then they just blew them out of the stadium. You wonder, it's like, all right, do you have a little bit of a formula there? Like losing to Caleb Williams and USC, like there's no shame in that. But it took a while for Notre Dame to feel like a little bit more like, do I trust them every week? Beginning of the year, you didn't. I thought by the end of the season, you sort of did. It was a really weird year, no doubt.
Yeah. And last hit on the ACC here, Miami, best case scenario, I think, is they score a touchdown against Virginia this year.
I'm pretty sure Middle Tennessee State's not on the schedule, right?
You don't lose to Middle Tennessee. Look, that Virginia game, 14-12 and 4 overtimes. They didn't score. It was all field goals and 2-point conversions. It was on Bally Sports on some weird off channel that you had to find. We'll see with Miami. We'll see if Tyler Van Dyke is better. We'll see if the coordinator changes help things. But I don't see them in contention for the ACC.
No,
just don't embarrass yourself like you did last year.
I want, as someone who loves college football and has for a long time, I want Miami to be like, oh, you're playing Miami, not like Miami. Like
when Mark Richt was there and they beat Notre Dame.
I was there. I mean, that was insane. Miami was a big deal. The turnover chain and that was they were
number 2 in the country. They were number 2 in the country that year. I think it might have been after Notre Dame or right around.
Yeah, and then they end up losing to Pitt, which I think might have been Kenny Pickett's first game or something. And it was I'm not saying they need to be that relevant, but come on, be top 20, top 25 consistently. That's at least give me a 9-3 season, Miami. And it's just they were light years away from that last fall.
I was in Gainesville last week visiting Florida, and I turned on the TV in the hotel, and on might have been ESPN2, they were doing 30 for 30s, and the U Part 2 came up, and I was like, man, 2001 Miami, that was a team. It is fun when Miami's good and doing things. So it's also kind of wild to look back at that Nevin Shapiro scandal and see things like, oh man, players are getting a little bit of money from somebody as tearing down the program. Go back and watch the U Part 2 and the things that Miami was, that whole mess of it in Miami investigation where the NCAA was paying the lawyer of Nevin Shapiro so he could sit in on these interviews. It was insane. For most of that stuff was just players getting money. There were some other not great things, obviously, but that was the high point of, all right, things are out of control here with terms of what the NCAA is investigating and how it's going about it. And it's a very different world now. So we'll see if Miami can ever get back to that. Pete, any last thoughts on the ACC and the conference that Notre Dame is technically not a part of?
Yeah, they're never to join. I'm glad that the ACC finally is doing away with divisions. When you look at TV ratings for the ACC championship game, and you're just what, you're killing yourself here.
It's never a game. It's never a game you got to see. It's never a game.
The only time it was when the ACC championship game was Clemson versus Notre Dame, and I think it did 10 million.
Yep.
And that was I hope someone at the ACC was why are we doing this to ourselves? Why don't we put Clemson and Florida State on again in Part 2? It's a league that should have much more stature than it does. Like it's not a league where Florida you want your one of your preeminent brands to be like just complaining and pissing and moaning about TV rights deals. Cause it's a good league with some good tradition and some good brands. And it's got to figure out a way to be more relevant than it has nationally. And I think Florida State, Miami can be part of that. If NC State gets Notre Dame, NC State can be part of that. But it's a weird league. I think that it should have a higher, I guess, approval rating from its own members than it does.
Let me get you out of here on this. I wrote a column last week that the ACC should add Stanford and Cal. Notre Dame is a school that has been in favor of that. Florida State is not. Clemson is not. North Carolina, UNC are not. Where do you fall on whether or not they should add them, and whether or not Notre Dame should kind of have a role in determining that?
Well, if I was the ACC, I would tell Notre Dame, we will gladly take Stanford and Cal if you join as a full member. And then we'll see how much support Notre Dame actually has for Stanford and Cal, because I think that's where you hit the limit of that. I think Stanford and Cal are very much ACC schools. They happen to be on the West Coast.
Right.
If geography doesn't matter anymore, and college athletics is telling us that it doesn't, then it would make sense. I still look at maps and see how far away those schools are from those other schools. It doesn't add up to me, but. I guess you're either sort of expanding or contracting at this point. It might be wise for the ACC to pick up 2 Power 5 programs with one elite athletic department, but neither have any sort of football tradition to speak of. So I think it makes sense for the ACC to do, but I say that begrudgingly because I wish that it didn't.
Actually, as I was writing that story, I learned someone around the situation told me Notre Dame getting to Stanford and Cal is actually quicker than getting to Blacksburg, Virginia Tech.
Yeah.
Just because there's different ways to play into it. And actually, Stanford and Cal are also part of the America East. They are affiliate members in, I don't remember, in what is sports? Field hockey. They're in the America East in field hockey. So they're already traveling. We'll see. There was an ACC meeting that was scheduled for Tuesday that was canceled, a normal meeting. Who knows? No timeline on whether or not that's going to happen, but we will see what happens with the ACC. That is best case, worst case scenario for the Big Ten, the Big 12, the ACC. We've now gone through all 5 Power 5 conferences and the Group of 5, and we are wrapping up our preseason content here on the Until Saturday feed. Reminder, next week we'll be back to our normal schedule. I will be here with Nicole Auerbach for Power Hour. Max and Sam will have a show. Ari and David Ubben will have Saturday recaps, Thursday previews, and stuff like that. So we're wrapping this up. We thank you all for listening. Make sure you're following the podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get podcasts, as well as the YouTube channel. Please give us 5-star reviews and drop any questions you have in there as well. We'll read them on the show. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. We will be going live every Thursday and Saturday and Sunday throughout the season. Looking forward to getting in the full swing of things. Pete, appreciate you having me. Everybody, thanks for listening. Remember, you can't spell Until Saturday without us, and we will catch you in the next one.